Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for those who have stayed. We have a very distinguished panel coming up. I'm going to give everyone another 30 seconds to wrap up conversations. All right, thanks everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our next panel on the important topic of tax policy. I'm sure taxes are nagging many of us this time of year. You still have a couple of weeks to file with TurboTax. In fact, over the past 5 years, TurboTax has helped more than 5 million Canadians file for free. But I digress. Today we have Jay Goldberg from the Consumer Choice Centre, Sean Speer, co-founder of The Hub, and Dan Nowlan with National Bank. And this distinguished panel will be moderated by the Honourable Tony Clement, a former boss of mine and Harper-era Cabinet Minister for Industry Canada, Treasury Board, and Health Canada. I'll welcome our panelists to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Intuit, for being the sponsor of this part of our program. And as Rodney mentioned, he is an FS, former staffer of mine, and very, very proud of where my staffers have gone since being employed by me over the years, 25 years of politics, and basically 25 years of going to the Manning Center conferences, or now the Canada Strong and Free. So thanks for being here. Thanks for sticking around. We've got a riveting performance for you on tax reform. Very excited. Yeah, let's hear it. Woo! There we go. That's the excitement that we want to hear on this topic, and it is an important topic. It's one that has many different facets to it that our panel may or may not get to, but certainly a lot of it we will. Issues like simplifying the tax system, the issue of fairness, improving fairness in the tax system, enhancing economic growth. How does the tax system do that? Addressing tax avoidance and evasion. There could be, of course, with the things that are going on now, adapting the tax system, making sure it's fit for purpose when our economy is and will be changing rapidly. And, of course, the ever-present issue of fiscal sustainability. All of these are appropriate topics when you're talking about tax reform. We want to put workers first as well. That's an important aspect of this at this conference as well. So there's a lot to talk about. We've got about 45 minutes or so. So we're just going to try to keep it conversational. Dan, I want to start with you. Obviously, as I was saying, we need a tax system that is fit for purpose in the new world that we're finding ourselves in. I mean, how do you address that, or what comes to mind when we look at our present tax system and where we have to go?
Yeah, I mean, what I find most disappointing is every time it becomes a political conversation about taxes, we kind of forget what we're trying to do. We're trying to generate growth, we're trying to attract capital, and we're trying to create long-term, healthy, sustainable jobs for people. And a tax system needs to encourage that. And a lot of times we'll get to a conversation that talks about making rich people or big corporations pay their fair share, when in fact they do, largely. And if they don't, they should be made to do that with probably better regulation and surveillance. But the reality is, generally speaking, they do. So how do we do that? And the way to do it is not by trying, I think, to nickel and dime people the way politicians tend to want to direct that. And it's particularly disappointing when you see that happen with the federal government. Provincial governments do it all the time. I'm from New Brunswick. In 2015, the province increased the top marginal tax rate from 47% to almost 55% for 1 year. And they lost a lot of good people, a lot of doctors, a lot of professionals, a lot of people left the province, and the next year they changed it back, but the damage was done.
No, and that is the story of tax reform. The unintended consequences can be quite horrific for an economy. There's no doubt about it. Jay, I want you to talk a little bit about Consumer Choice Center, which is something that you're obviously part of. And tell us how that might intersect with our topic today, too.
Well, I think it intersects with our topic in a number of ways, but I think, first of all, we have to think about where consumers are right now. And, you know, there's studies that have been out in recent months that have shown 50% of Canadians are $200 away from not being able to pay their bills. You know, and we can talk about how many different reasons there are for that: lack of economic growth, lack of pay growth in terms of jobs, but also taxation. Taxation is very heavy, and, you know, we just alluded to the fact that it's close to 50% in a lot of places in this country right now. And obviously we need to have a conversation about tax reform, how to make it the case that folks are able to keep more of what they earn and to incentivize folks to earn more. And so I think that's absolutely a consumer issue, in the sense that consumers are, as we've been saying, nickeled and dimed so much with so many different taxes as well, that it really discouraged from earning, making a living, earning more, working harder. And I mean, you just picture, someone said to me of late, a good friend of mine, you know, we get our paychecks, you get your direct deposit in your bank, you think, okay, I got, you know, my paycheck, here's what I can do with it. Well, it's funny, you start to think about, well, what did you actually earn? How many people actually look at their statements each month, and what did you actually earn? And how much more is it actually? And where is it going? Going to the government. What is the government doing with all that money? Is it being used efficiently, or could consumers be using it better? And so how do we make sure that we're leaving more money in people's pockets, but also incentivizing growth?
Sean, Speer, obviously one of the things that the Hub has been able to do, if I may editorialize, is to kind of raise the bar when it comes to some of these important topics.
Thank you.
Including our fiscal situation, our taxation system. These are not alien topics for the Hub, but I'd love to get your sort of assessment of where we are right now.
Yeah, there's so many ways to take this conversation. I hope we have an opportunity to talk about the empire building that we've seen at the Canada Revenue Agency over the past several years, and the need, I think, to look systematically at what the principal responsibility of CRA is, and the extent to which it's increasingly, I think, deviating from that core mission. But the most important tax policy issue we're facing right now is, of course, tariffs in the United States, which I think ought to be understood fundamentally as taxes. And Canadian Conservatives we're situated in a broader Anglo-American dialogue about the future of our movement. And I think this is a critical juncture for Canadian Conservatives to resist what we're seeing play out in the United States, the tendency towards statism, the tendency towards using state both with respect to economic development and all the rest, industrial policy, but also on the subject of taxation. Just yesterday, Reihan Salam, the president of the Manhattan Institute, someone who spoke here last year, coined the phrase class warfare conservatives to describe those in the United States who, on one hand, purport to speak on behalf of conservative ideas, and on the other hand, are abandoning a lot of hard-won victories by conservatives over the past several decades with respect to the size and role of government in the marketplace, with respect to taxation and so on. And so I think we find ourselves at a critical juncture. Are we going to follow the Americans and conservatives elsewhere in the Anglo-American world in that direction, or are we going to effectively double down on some tried and tested principles and ideas around taxation, government spending, et cetera? And I think a lot of people in this room are part of that dialogue. And I'm heartened to see that so far in this election campaign, we've eschewed a lot of those wrong-headed ideas in Canada.
Yeah, Dan, just jumping off from Sean's point, you know, really any discussion of a tax system also is connected to government's aspirations. You know, what percentage of the economy is right-sized versus just massive empire building. And you know, you as a person who knows politics as well as the business world, I mean, how do you respond to that? What is the proper place of the tax system in relation to empire building by government?
Yeah, one of the things that I find particularly annoying when I listen to politicians and sometimes reporters asking politicians question is they announce an idea and they say, well, how are you going to pay for it? There is tons of money. When the Conservatives were last in government, the total revenue for the government was just under $300 billion. Now it's just under $500 billion. The government is literally swimming in tax revenues. And even under Conservative governments, the Leviathan tends to grow. I've got a great story, one of your former colleagues, Bernard Valcourt. I asked him what it was like being in a Harper government versus a Brian Mulroney government. He said, well, a couple of things, but main thing is they made me Minister of ACOA in 1988, and there were 372 people who worked for ACOA, and then they made me Minister of ACOA in 2011, and there were 872 people who worked there, doing exactly the same thing.
Right. That happens a lot. No, that's absolutely true. It just seems a never, and of course we've seen the federal public service grow, what, by 45%, I think, in the Trudeau era, which continues to this day, I might add. But in any event, I do want to ask Jay something specifically. Let's open the topic of CRA reform.
Yep.
Both of the other gentlemen have mentioned that as well. And, we've got these programs like automatic tax filing and some other things that are happening. Do you see a connection between the growth of CRA as an institution of government with all of these new policies rather than their basic tax collection role? Is this a concern or a problem when you're trying to advocate for consumers?
It's absolutely a problem, and I think if you look at some of what's happened with the CRA over the past number of years, you look at some of the hacks that have been seen, social security numbers that have been hacked. You look, for example, during the pandemic with CERB and what went on with the payments to wrong places, and now you see a CRA trying to take on an additional role of automatic tax filing. And one of the big concerns of that, of course, is that government's motivation is always to maximize the revenue that they're taking in. And so it's not to maximize your return and maximize what you keep. And it's certainly not to point out all of the possible things you could take advantage of, tax credits, ways you could save money to try to maximize your return. So certainly we have to question, why is the CRA, why is the government wanting to take on this additional role when you have so many programs out there that are willing to do this for low-income Canadians for free and are more likely to actually get you better outcomes? And so I think we need to be very wary of a CRA that's trying to take on additional roles when they've proven that they can't manage with staff that is almost, I think we figured out, 2 to 1 compared to the IRS down in the States if you adjust for population. And they're not able to manage some of the current tasks that they have right now.
Yeah, Sean, I know this will come a shock to you as it is to me, but sometimes in government there's mission creep.
Yes.
I know that's shocking for the audience as well. I mean, any comments on this growing role for CRA?
Yeah, I mean, one way to kind of think about the past decade is that the Trudeau government has used deficit spending to square the circle between Stephen Harper's tax rates and Justin Trudeau's spending preferences. And we've seen the national debt double, essentially, over the past decade. That clearly is unsustainable. But it seems to me the tax conversation also needs to confront Canada's competitiveness. In a world of tariffs, in a world of right-to-work statutes in various U.S. states, in a world of the American state governments rolling out the red carpet to firms who want to shift capital or shift production into the United States, I think we need to overcorrect in a way when it comes to competitiveness. And so I think the next government, whoever forms it, is going to have to think more radically about, it's not just competitiveness in a normal sense, which was already a problem for Canada. It's competitiveness in a world in which the incentives for Canadian producers to jump over those tariff walls will be pretty powerful. And in that world, I think we published something in the Hub last week or 10 days ago by Matt Spoke, who I know is here, about significantly lowering Canada's corporate tax rate. I think we're still on the wrong side of the Laffer curve when it comes to corporate taxes. I think there's scope to go much lower and not suffer a big revenue loss, especially against the counterfactual of firms leaving. As Dan says, I know the politics can be tricky, but Canadians already earn significantly more if they move to the United States. And then you layer on top of that the fact that I think the average top rate in Canada is north of 50% now, which it feels like eons ago in the 2011 election, of all people, Tom Mulcair described as confiscatory. And so I think we're living in a moment of excess egalitarianism, and in a way, the biggest challenge facing the country is macroeconomic. And we're going to need to see a pro-competitiveness agenda and a way for politicians to try to speak to those egalitarian impulses in order to purchase the kind of political license, if I can put it that way. And I'll just make one final point on this, if you'll permit me. Remember in 2006, the Harper government cuts the GST, and it was criticized by economists and others as relatively inefficient. There could have been more and different or better ways to cut taxes. I mean, first of all, I'll take any form of tax cut. But secondly, what a lot of these people misunderstood is lowering the GST by 2 points provided the political license to lower the corporate rate from 22 to 15%. They had to be understood as a package. And so in that sense, I think it'll be key for the next government to try to do something similar, to try to purchase the political license, to make progress on CIT rates, to make progress on top marginal tax rates, but do it in a way that is part of a broader suite that you can still present as broadly progressive. I mean, in the absence of doing that, I think we're going to see significant capital and production flight and increasing people like myself and my family who've moved from Canada to the United States because of better employment opportunities and better wages.
Can I just add something?
By all means, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look, and this is from National Bank's research, which I invite you all to look at, it's great. By 2012, Canada had an advantage when it came to corporate taxes in Canada for the reforms you just talked about. And I remember in 2015, the company that owns Tim Hortons now, which is a South American company, moved their headquarters from Florida to Canada.
You're here.
But they didn't do it because the actual corporate tax rate, which was it was actually roughly the same, about 26.5%. They moved it because prior to the Trump tax reform in 2016, which was radical, those global companies could not bring capital back in the United States without facing a massive tax bill, a 40% tax bill. So part of the Trump tax reform was getting rid of that. So we have gone from being very competitive to the point where people would move large corporate head offices to Canada to the point where we're not even hearing that. Like Brookfield moved their head office to New York. So it happens all the time. And we had a lot of examples, a lot of people talking about doing that for a variety of different reasons, but one of them is we're not very competitive.
Yeah. Sorry, did you want to jump in?
Well, and if I can talk a bit more about egalitarianism, and I think that the importance to nod to those issues, but not to succumb to the class warfare conservatism that we're seeing in other parts of the Anglo-American world, we need to understand that we're a movement of aspirants and strivers. Social mobility and meritocracy are in the conservative DNA. And I think one of the most underrated tax policy proposals that speaks to that aspect of Canadian conservatism was put forward 21 years ago by someone on this panel. In Tony's leadership campaign for the Conservative Party of Canada, he proposed the idea that we ought to provide a lifetime income tax exemption of $250,000 to people entering the workforce, in effect, to communicate that we have a collective interest of supporting people in this formative moment where they either transition from secondary school into employment or from post-secondary education, but it's a critical moment when people are either paying off student loans, saving for a mortgage, saving to start a business, and we know that because of precarity, income and economic precarity for those people, we're seeing things like delayed family formation. We're seeing increasing angst and pessimism amongst that cohort. And so in this precise moment, 21 years later, it seems to me that proposal has even greater resonance than it did then. I don't know, Tony, if you want to reflect on it at all.
Well, I would note that I did not beat Stephen Harper despite having that proposal. The policy
You were
proposal.
21 years too early.
I was 21. That's the story of my life. No, it was. I thought it was a very forward-looking. It was called Jumpstart 250 at the time in 2004, Conservative Party leadership, and I'm still pretty proud of that one. And I think you're right in the sense that there is still something that needs to be done.
Yes.
To help young people, young workers, young entrepreneurs just starting a new business.
Yes.
Or young home buyers just trying to get that first, a little bit of a ledge into our economy. So that was the purpose of it. It wasn't that expensive. It was like you priced it what, 116 million or something
Yes, that's
like
right.
that. So, it doesn't cost billions of dollars, but it could have a really good impact. But, some of these ideas die with the leadership candidate who dies, so.
They might come back, you never know.
You never know, I guess, but.
That would be huge.
But it does sort of beg the question, and I know we have to tread gingerly here because we're in the middle of a federal election campaign, but there have been tax proposals by the political parties, and they are coming forward with ideas. Let's talk a little bit about that, understanding that we can't be partisan about it, but analytical, I think, is okay. So, Dan, have you say the National Bank has done?
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit of research. There's a piece that we put out in terms of looking at the different policy proposals. I invite people to take a look at it. One of the things that I think, the one that I find the most interesting, because it's actually a policy proposal from 2006, which I think Jim Flaherty had talked about during the election campaign, or after he became finance minister, actually, which was about the deferral of capital gains taxes if you reinvested it in Canadian assets. Right. And the example that Minister Flaherty gave back then was if somebody sold a family cottage that isn't your principal residence and you wanted to reinvest that into something else or renovate your home or whatever you wanted to do, that should be done tax-free or deferred anyway. So I find that that's come up again as a really interesting piece, because if you think about capital gains, about that $400 billion in revenues we're talking about, it's a very vanishingly small component of total revenues for the government. So getting rid of capital gains and the amount of what that would do, effectively getting rid of capital gains tax, what that would do to generate investment, I think would be really interesting to watch. I think it'd be very, very compelling. And again, we need investment dollars. We need to have people have reason to invest and reinvest in the country. And there's a lot of capital that might be trapped in certain things, say family-owned apartment buildings or something like that, that could be redeployed.
Jay, anything come to mind in terms of your analysis of the situation?
Yeah, I think it's very refreshing to see at least the two major parties are talking about income tax cuts, and tax cuts are now the conversation. It's not a conversation about one party or one side that wants tax cuts. I think there's a clear recognition that people are overtaxed and that people just need more money in their pockets, more of their own money. The proposal you go back to from Tony's campaign is fascinating, I think, today. Not to go too off topic back there, but you look at, for example, the cost of housing and what the cost of housing was back in 2004 and what it is now and what you need for a down payment. We're talking about delayed family formation and so many other factors. So actually doing something, particularly for young Canadians, I think would be absolutely essential. But it's good to see that the parties are talking about a lack of affordability and the need for more money back in people's pockets. Is it lowering the bottom rate? Is that the answer, or is the answer raising the basic personal amount? Is it something you've suggested about $250,000 the first earn that you're not taxed on, but it's good to see that we're shifting the conversation finally to a place where the parties are talking about a lack of affordability, and the answer to that being more money in people's pockets.
I agree, but I would say we're living in a microeconomic political moment, but the secular challenges facing the country are macroeconomic. So yes, of course, lowering income tax rates will help on the margins. It's going to boost disposable income for sure. But it's not going to get at the fact that Canada has had, lived in is living in an era of secular stagnation. The past decade has been marked by declining business investment, declining productivity, declining GDP per capita. In a way, we need to put the defibrillator to Canada's economy. Jason Kenney understood that in 2019. He did something pretty radical on the corporate tax side, such that the combined federal Alberta rate is competitive with a lot of U.S. states. But Alberta is an outlier in that regard. And so one thing that one of the priorities of the Harper government, you recall, Tony, was to try to build a consensus around a 25% combined federal-provincial rate. One hopes that we actually, first of all, we've never actually achieved the 25% target. But as I was saying earlier, I think there's a case today, in light of the challenges we're facing, the threat from the U.S., that we have to go more radical. And I just hope that we can persuade Canadians that a suite of changes that on the face of it may look quote unquote regressive in and of themselves are in the interests of the country as a whole, keeping in mind, of course, that our tax and transfer system overall is enormously progressive. As Dan says, when you look at the distribution of taxes, it's hugely disproportionately paid by high income earners. I mean, if I have one regret about our politics over the past decade or longer, is we've gone from everyone agreeing that the system ought to be on balance progressive to the notion that every individual policy has to be progressive. That's a wrong way to think about the trade-offs that you said at the beginning of the conversation. Some things are about economic efficiency. Some things are about equity and redistribution. And we need to be able to have these two ideas in our minds. And I think there's a lot of factors, there's a lot of reasons that have kind of contributed to this discourse that asks the distributional question first, as opposed to asking, is this going to help Canada where we need the help most, which is a slow and stagnant economy?
And if I may, you mentioned the Laffer curve before, and with corporate tax, I think it's really important to point out, when the corporate tax was cut, first under the Liberals and then the Harper Conservatives, the revenue went up. Oh,
like doubled. Like the federal government's bringing in like $90 billion in corporate tax revenue today.
Right.
When we started the rate reductions from 22 to 15, it was bringing in like $30 billion.
So there's so much room. There's so much more room to go.
Yes.
And I just want to turn this over to something else that crosses my mind. We're talking about tax reform and tax policy, but it's not in a vacuum. It's not as if the rest of the world is waiting, their motor running, but they're not moving, waiting for Canada to get its act together on our tax policy. There's going to be massive changes, I would argue, in world tax competitiveness. Under President Trump, there is talk. We don't know how accurate or whether it'll come to pass, but at least they're kicking around the idea of 0% capital gains on everything. Just cut the capital gains tax out of the equation entirely. So again, I'd love to get your analysis. I'm not saying we're tinkering around the edges, but we've also got to think big on some of these issues as well. Dan, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. That's why that idea around capital gains taxes. I wish someone would go a step further and say we're just going to get rid of it entirely. We wouldn't need to track things like, other residences. We wouldn't need to keep. I'm not even 100% certain why we're tracking principal residences. That scares the hell out of me. But whatever. So that would make it a lot simpler. And it's like. I'll tell one story. Our former Minister of Finance, Joe Oliver's here, probably the last person who's ever going to have a balanced budget, is in the room. And
Here.
when I was working for him, the bureaucracy came to us with an idea to broaden out the GST to something that wasn't GSTable at the time. And their justification for it was, well, this allows us to keep the GST lower for everyone. And he said, what do you think? And I said, well, I wasn't aware we had a plan to further cut the GST, so I don't know why we'd apply it to more things. And he said, okay, I want you to tell the department, and the Department of Finance bureaucrats are amazing, but he said, I want you to tell them never to show me anything that raises taxes on anyone again. And from that point on, they stopped doing that, so.
Right.
I used to joke when I was in Ottawa, you'd get presented with these really complex tax proposals, and the heuristic I used was, after I figured things out, was it relieving, tightening, or neutral? And if it was relieving or neutral, I didn't need to understand all the details. But if it was tightening, I did, because they were trying to raise taxes on someone.
Yeah.
Well, and this does beg the question, and it's like the weather, everybody talks about it, but nothing ever happens. Simplification of the tax code. Can we talk about that for a little bit? Is that desirable? Is it possible? Is it a pipe dream?
Well, I think it's definitely not a pipe dream. I think that there are so many things we can do, and that's one of the reasons you talk about automatic tax filing, or the role of the CRA, putting them back in the box, doing less. If we had simplified taxes where it was just a question of what is the rate and you're paying it, then we wouldn't have to have this complicated conversation about fancy filing and is the CRA, should they get involved, which they shouldn't. And, you mentioned that tracking of principal residences. I mean, what reason would the government have to be tracking principal residences?
What possible reason?
Other than potentially a home equity tax,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, but to go back to the original question with simplification, absolutely it's possible, and that's one of the things we should be thinking big, because the United States is going to go further probably in their tax cutting and tax reform, and other countries are as well. We have to think big, we have to be competitive. Simplification is one of those things, and you talk about it all the time. Politicians love to cut out niches, all governments do that, but it's absolutely time for simplification, and if we can do that in a way that makes it so that individuals can more easily understand as well what they're earning, what they're paying, I think that's important too, because I think a lot of people just don't understand it, see what gets into their bank account, and don't actually think about what are we actually earning, how much is going to the government, and what is it going towards.
May I say two things on the subject of simplification as someone who helped contribute to the system's complexity during the Harper era? I'm somewhat skeptical of big bang simplification, the idea that you would do a comprehensive tax reform in a single shot. I think amongst other reasons why I'm skeptical, I just don't even know if we have the state capacity to do that. Trying to think through the interaction of various changes at once, I think, could create a lot of risks. But one thing the Trudeau government did, for which it deserves some credit, is it did start to do simplification within certain categories. So we have various tax expenditures related to particular areas, think housing or post-secondary education or labor or investing or whatever for seniors. A lot of those credits or expenditures have taken shape over time. There's an opportunity, I think, within discrete categories to simplify, to consolidate. The Trudeau government did this on caregiving, incidentally. There was 3 or 4 tax expenditures related to caregiving. They tidied them up, established a single caregiving tax expenditure. I think that may be a more practical, durable way to move towards simplification. But the other more radical idea to put on the table, partly self-interestedly because I'm married with young children, so I do think there is time in a world in which we're talking about issues around delayed family formation, fertility, to ask ourselves, is the individual the right unit of taxation? Or should we be thinking about shifting to a family or the household as the proper unit of taxation? Most of us don't make decisions in our households as discrete individuals. we make them as a family, and ostensibly the tax system ought to recognize or treat people as they are, as opposed to how it thinks of us. And incidentally, what's interesting about the federal government's tax and transfer system is, in some instances, it treats us as individuals. In some instances, it treats us as households.
That's right.
The only consistency between the two is whatever the government selects, whatever one is most advantageous to the government. When you think about the clawbacks for the Canada Child Benefit or old age security or whatever. And so I think one of the biggest challenges facing our society are these questions around male-female relationships, delayed family formation, fertility, et cetera. And in that context, I do think there is room to be asking ourselves, should we start recognizing families in our tax system?
Because it really does come down to human behavior.
Precisely.
That we're talking about here. It is behavioral economics. I remember reading about in medieval Europe, one of the favorite taxes of the monarchies was to tax windows. And so people would end up boarding up their windows and living in darkness because they didn't want to pay the extra tax. That's a human behavioral response to higher taxes, right? We must have those in our system all over the place.
Yes. Yes.
So how do we deal with? We want to encourage. Well, again, I have to be careful how I say this, because ultimately we want individuals and families to make decisions rather than government to make decisions about what is appropriate behavior, right?
Yes.
So we seem to be a long way away from that with our tax systems.
It's a great point too about what do we want people to do, and one of the things we want companies to do, or individuals who run companies to do, is invest more. And one of the things that stops them from investing is because the returns are too low. And what drives return? Well, in some cases, if you own a factory, you buy a piece of equipment. For tax purposes, you amortize that over the life of the piece of equipment, and you can only claim a certain amount over that period. But that's not the way the returns work. Right. A dollar up front is worth way more than it is in 20 years when the equipment might run out. So if we encourage investment, again, by having accelerated capital costs where people can claim the entire cost of a piece of equipment, any piece of equipment, right away, again, that's the kind of thing that would drive current investment and, more importantly, drive modernization and probably drive more R&D, which has been a place where Canada's also been lacking on a global basis.
Any other comments on driving without messing up family relationships and other things that we deem to be the public good, or at least people do? Is there anything else that government should or shouldn't be doing without creating unintended consequences? Broad question, but that's really the question.
Let me take it up. One of the issues up for debate in this election is the Trudeau government's media subsidies. The Trudeau government is providing hundreds of millions of dollars directly and indirectly to Canadian news outlets. Presently, the biggest single measure is called the Journalism Labor Tax Credit. It's essentially a refundable tax credit based on headcount. So by definition, legacy outlets disproportionately benefit. It's a function of their inputs. It's not a function of market outcomes. And so I think there's a question even within the conservative world about how we think of these subsidies. Should we get rid of them altogether, which I could argue in favor of, or is there a reason to preserve them in some way, shape, or form? If we're going to preserve them, it seems to me we need to shift from a system that preferences inputs to a system that preferences outcomes. And so, for instance, we have a pretty generous political donation tax credit. I would be comfortable providing a tax credit for subscribers that's the equivalent of the political donation tax credit, recognizing that both political parties and journalistic outlets play a role in our civic democracy. But it seems to me we need to shift that from the status quo, which is basically kind of freezing in place a particular model of news media, which in the absence of those credits and public support would die.
Yeah, I think there's a big question, though, about, anytime journalistic outlet is getting taxpayer dollars, whether or not they can be fully objective. But it's interesting you mentioned the political party donation tax credit. I think a lot of people don't know, and this is another thing that I think needs serious reform. If you donate to a charity, the tax credit you get back is far, far less than if you donate to a political party. And
Oh, we're aware of that.
That absolutely has to change. I mean, if we're talking about reform, there's no way that if you're donating to your local charity, you should be getting less back than you're donating to a political party.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, gentlemen. Let me throw this out to you as kind of the last go-round here. I mean, let's put it this way. Sean, you talked about state capacity. Is it even possible in the Canada in which we exist now that we can actually think large about tax reform and making a better tax system? Is it even workable in this system? Dan, did you want to start us off?
Well, I'd like to think it is. I mean, the reality is, as we were talking about, theoretically, if you lower taxes, your revenues should ultimately go up because there'll be more growth, there'll be more investment, there'll be more everything. That example I gave about New Brunswick increasing the top marginal rate, the government said they would bring in from the 6,000 top filers, they would bring in $30 extra million. They wound up bringing in -6.
Right.
And I know one of the guys, it was a Liberal government who did it, he was a big Liberal supporter, he was a doctor. I just read in the paper the other day, he's now the head of cardiac surgery at Yale Medical School. So he's gone. And he left the year after they did that. So so I think there is not only the room to be radical, I think we need to be radical because, as you said, the rest of the world isn't standing still.
Jay?
You're absolutely right. The rest of the world isn't standing still. We're going to see reform south of the border. It's going to be probably bigger than the last. Obviously, they're going to want to build on the Trump tax cuts. We've talked about the possibility of getting rid of the capital gains taxes. And I think we haven't really talked about here, but tariffs are going to be a huge question going forward here as well, because tariffs are taxes. And obviously, there's the trade conflict that's going on, but the retaliatory tariffs, what Canada's talking about doing, it's just a tax on Canadians. Yep. And so we have to be very, very concerned about what's going on, because we can talk about tax reform here, but if we're into some sort of long trade conflict and we're all of a sudden hit by these retaliatory tariffs that are going to be very punitive on Canadians, that's going to be a huge bomb that's thrown into our system.
The retaliatory tariffs announced in the second week of the campaign dwarfed the tax cuts that were promised in the first week of the campaign.
That's right.
And so your point's well taken. If I can wrap up with just some comments about the broader intellectual milieu. I mentioned trends we're seeing in the United States, a shift away from conservatives' commitment to markets, to a limited conception of the government. Here in Canada, we're hearing increasing arguments in favor of economic nationalism. Historically, those have been arguments on the left. Increasingly, though, you're hearing people make those cases in terms of realism, that we have to do this because other countries are doing it. Just because Donald Trump wants to walk U.S. market capitalism off a cliff doesn't mean we ought to follow him. In fact, in a lot of ways, it seems to me this is an opportunity to double down on the ideas that we believe, on market liberalization, on more competition, on concerns around incentives for capital and for workers, et cetera. I think conservatives in Canada face some big first principle questions in the coming years. In a world in which conservatism in the Anglo-American world is going through this kind of period of self-reflection and disruption, I think it would be a great mistake for us to relearn. To force ourselves to relearn the lessons of the past. It's 2025. This year will mark the 40th anniversary of the MacDonald Royal Commission report, which I think represents a kind of paradigmatic moment for Canada. It sets in motion the major tax reductions we see in the Mulroney era, the privatization, of course, Canada-U.S. free trade, and I think by and large, those choices and the paradigm that they represented have been good for Canada over the past 40 years. And so why would we go back why we would go back to the failed ideas that they replaced, I think would be a huge mistake for the country and a huge mistake for our movement.
Having said all that, it's been great to have you here. Thank you so much. Thanks to Intuit. Rodney, I know you're going to say a couple of extra words, but do appreciate their sponsorship. And I also want to thank another sponsor, the News Forum. I'm associated with them with a show called Boom and Bust, and they've been a great sponsor for this event as well. So thanks for enjoying our presentations today.
Well, thank you very much to the panelists. The final thing I'll say on simplification is a lot of people don't know, every year to make tax software, we have to build a tax engine that incorporates 24,000 tax changes when you layer in federal and provincial. So, there's a lot of room for simplification. Thanks so much, guys. Let's give our panelists one more round of applause.